I think we should get started. This is one of the first sessions in which we will only have 30 minutes to discuss very interesting topics, so we cannot waste 1 second. So good morning or afternoon, everyone. Let me check how many people we have. Yeah, we can get started. So thanks for attending today's webinar. Please remember to mute yourself whenever you're not speaking. All slides and links referenced in this webinar will be sent out along with the recording in the next PD2Go Light Center monthly newsletter. We are ready to start this session facilitated by Professor Kearney Hernandez from Light Center's Academic Resource Center, ARC. This 30-minute session will discuss how love and compassion for our students and profession can be a powerful force for many students and educators. Dr. Kearney Hernandez holds a Doctor of Education in Educational Leadership for Social Studies and a Master's of Arts in Early Childhood Education and a Bachelor of Arts in Criminology, Law, and Society. So thanks, Dr. Hernandez, for facilitating today's workshop, and the floor is yours.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for being here wherever you are located. I'm really excited to be here with you all today and to just share a few things with you in relation to this notion of teaching as an act of love. So I would love for it to be more dialogue based. So if you have any questions, feel free to take yourself off mute or, drop them in the chat. At any time, and really just feel like the floor is open. Because we're restricted to 30 minutes, I'll try to get through these slides rather quickly, but I built in a few time spaces for questions and dialogue, and they'll be rather short, but I will do my best to give us some good time, okay? So let's get started. I thought we'd start with a disclaimer, right? I'm not an expert on love. I cannot teach you how to love. You're not going to go away today leaving with the master plan for love. But I do believe deep down within my whole heart that we all possess the capacity to love and to love deeply. And I believe that when we bring that capacity to love into our spaces, into our lives, then we have really meaningful relationships with everybody we encounter, and that includes our students, right? Okay, so let's begin here. I think this is always helpful, right? When we're thinking about how do we build our capacity to love, I think it's always important to think about what were some of those unloving behaviors that either we witnessed, that either we produced in the classroom space, or we've been a product of those. So would anybody like to share, take themselves off mute and maybe share some experiences?
Oh, yes, Dr. Hernandez, if you allow me.
Please.
Good morning. So one thing that I don't like in the class behavior, if the students keep their camera off like I do now, but because I'm driving my kids off to school. And other things, if really they don't they are busy with their phones or they have the screen even if their camera on, but we see that they are busy with something else. We can recognize if the student with us in the class or not. So this is the things that, and the last one, if we ask a question and we try to engage them, they keep silent. And I know might be some students, they have some experience, might be they shy to share their experience. This is the things that I don't like their behavior in the class. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Before I respond, does anyone have any thoughts or other aspects to share, or maybe a response to Dr. Nino?
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to add something, if you don't mind, Dr. Hernandez.
Absolutely.
So, we all are adults and we all have families, small kids, most of us. And do we all the time love what our kids doing? No, not necessarily. We train them, we help them to change, to become what we want, what they need to have in the future. Therefore, I believe from the early stages, from the first days, we have to train our students, be engaged, don't be shy, don't be hesitant. This is the family, it's all together. We all learning one things in this classroom. And we are not the dictators in the classroom. We are the instructors to help them to build their future. This is what I see.
Beautiful, thank you. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to offer to the space?
There are a few comments on the chat, Professor Hernandez.
Oh, wow. Forgot about that. All right. Good morning. Yes.
Dr. Brodin says, I think this is a chance for us to reflect on our behaviors as unloving in the classroom and what we can do to be more loving to our students.
Right. And so to Dr. Nino's point, I would say when students come with their cameras off, when students come, right, when we have these perceptions of them as, right, not interested or not paying attention, it's really, right, there's a reaction, right? There's a visceral reaction that some of us may have to those actions by our students. And so one of the things we can do is really dig deep within ourselves to find out how we're being triggered in that moment, right? And think about what it is that we can do, right, to engage our students grounded in love, but still, right, a firmness, right? And so we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but I just wanted to say, to think about, like, how are you reacting to the student when they engage you in behaviors that you think are not, right, loving to you, okay? Thank you for that reminder, Dr. Brodin, and Dr. Nino for that beautiful example. Okay, so let's talk about some critical principles for teaching as an act of love that I've come across in my research and my work in my life. And this first part is really around this notion of embodied love, right? And I love Paulo Freire's work for this because he really speaks to this really deep love, right? And I think he's probably one of the earliest scholars that was able to bring the notion of love into education in a really profound sense, right? And so I'm not going to read all these quotes to you, but I love them there because I just feel like they bring their words to life, and I can't, you know, regurgitate them and do them justice. So I'm just going to read the bottom quote that says, I love my students not because they are in a room where I am teacher. I love my students to the extent in which I love the very process of being with them, right? And so, right, how do we embody love in the practices in which we engage our students, right? And so I think that's very, very much an important quality. The next piece is really this notion of moving beyond a feel-good notion of love, right? And Antonia Dardere, who is also a student of Paulo Freire, but also I had the opportunity to have her as a mentor. She writes about this really deep, important understanding of love as not this, right? She says not unconditional acceptance or unceasing words of sweetness or endless streams of hugs and kisses, right? She talks about it as a more profound, deep love, right? And so it doesn't mean that we're always like, you know, doing this nice thing where we're like, oh, okay, make you feel good, right? But really a deeper sense of what love means, right? If I love my students, I need to engage this act, right, in a way that is still grounded in love and still respects their humanity, but, you know, I still have to engage that practice, right? So if my students are not turning their cameras on, I could ignore it and I could leave it alone. Or I could say, I really care about your being, right? How are you today? I noticed you didn't have your camera on. Is everything okay, right? Rather than assuming that they're just turning it off because they don't care about what I have to say today, right? And that really is grounded in building a deeper relationship with students. Okay. My computer wants to freeze. Okay. So for this next piece, I really turned to Bell Hooks. She calls it an act of love, right? And so when we think about love always as this feeling, right, we rarely tend to recognize the acts that right, come with it. And she says to begin to think of love as an action, right, rather than a feeling, right? And that way we hold ourselves more accountable and responsible for how we engage with students, right? And so if we think about the actions that we take in the classroom, if we think about the actions that we take in our daily lives, then, you know, we're more likely to think about those actions as acts of love or, right, not acts of love, right? And so she gives these ingredients for love, which I thought were so like amazing and really profound, which are really simple, but like if we really think about it, right, they're really deep, right? So care, affection, recognition, respect, commitment, trust, honesty, and open communication, right? And so if we think about how we do that in the classroom, if we think about, did that action, include respect? Did that action include honesty? Did it include open communication, right? Then we can really begin to hone in on our practices as educators. And then this last piece that Bell Hooks also states, which is just like, I don't know why it was so profound when I first heard it, but I just think that like, wow, love and abuse cannot coexist, right? Love and hurt cannot coexist, right? And we all know, sometimes it takes a little bit of self-reflection to know, but we know those times when we're operating out of a space that is not, right? That is not love, right? That is more hurtful than we recognize sometimes. And so, right, she says this profound thing around awakening to love can only happen as we let go of our obsession with power and domination, right? And so we'll talk more about that in a little bit, which we only have like 20 more minutes left, but that is really important, right? Because the classroom dynamic already sets up a space where we're in a position of power, right, over students. And so we have to begin to recognize that power that we hold and then begin to operate and, right, loosen some of that, that power, right, that power dynamic that exists, okay? All right, so now I want to open it back up, right? After we talked about a few of those things, after they marinated a bit, what steps do you guys think you as educators can take to begin to engage in, right, teaching more as an act of love? Okay, mindful of the chat. Thank you, Professor Gannon.
All right, everybody, did you guys have a coffee this morning? Let's talk today.
I see Professor Lipo dropped in the chat, actually having a conversation, right? Yes, definitely.
I was going to say, listening more, just being more compassionate to students' stories as opposed to dismissing as an excuse, which sometimes I have to do, but just the act of listening, I think sometimes helps.
Definitely. I cannot tell you how many times like I'm listening to somebody and I'm like thinking of what I'm going to say next. And I'm like, yo, I'm not listening. I don't know what they said, So yeah, that is right. That's an art, right? The true act of listening, right?
So how we can demonstrate we are good listeners? Good listeners, one of the best ingredients of good leaders, and we are the leaders in the classroom. So once anyone responds, it is even nonsense what students say, we have to take off keywords from that sentence and get back to that person immediately. Yes, of course, you said this word, we're gonna reply to that word, we're gonna give more definition of that. So now let's think, maybe we can come up with a different idea by using this. Negative turns to the positive or vice versa. So this is when we're being in the classroom, just asking the question and let them talk and not responding even the couple seconds, that's disrespectful because we ask them and they come back to us. If they're gonna see that ongoing all the time, we're not responding to the response, that is going to be disrespect. They said, oh, he or she doesn't care. Why should I care myself to answer the question? So this helps to engage them, I believe, more and more.
Professor Hernandez, thank you, Professor Sherm. There are two more comments on the chat. Dr. Adienko says, letting the students know we're here to help, not to make their life hard with assignments. Dr. Broden says, I think one of the simplest things we can do is to make sure our students know that we believe in them and their ability to succeed. And I just wanted to add that I believe that the first step that we need to take is to get to know our students. To love someone, you need to know them. So I think that's the first steps that we need to take. And Professor Constance says generative listening is very important. You listen with your sense, you suspend judgment, and listen to the emotion conveyed.
Yes. Wow. Powerful, powerful thoughts and very important points. Every single person that spoke to it right now and chatted. And these things are very difficult as well, right? Because of all the constraints of time and just, right, you know, trying to meet the lesson each week. And so it is difficult. It does require, right, some deep planning. It does take space and time. But the more you practice at it, I'm telling you, the more you got it down. So we're gonna move along because I think we have 15 minutes left. And hopefully we can talk through some examples. And no worries, Professor Constant, about typing. Thank you. And we will keep going, okay? So this last part of the training is really just around, or the workshop is just really around this notion of humanizing education, right? And one of the most profound things that I heard that I've ever kind of been privy to was this notion that we cannot empower other people, right? We cannot humanize them, right? Because we don't possess that power, right? They possess that power within themselves. And so, it's always around creating conditions where folks can feel empowered themselves and where they can create, right, these humanizing practices and experiences together, right? And so it's not just an individual task, it's also a collective piece, but it's really around, right, what are we doing in the classroom to really create that space for students to feel, right, conditions of humanization, and also, right, the empowerment that they need to also be, right, agents in the classroom for themselves. And Professor Constance, so sorry to hear about your dog. I hope all is well. So I just had a few notes that I've come to learn about as I work with students. And this one is around courageous vulnerability and authenticity in our humanity, right? And I think a few folks dropped that in the chat, right? They said, right, you have to share with your students parts of yourself, right? I think Dr. Sherm was saying that, you know, when you're asking questions, right, and students are not responding, one of the things that I'll ask a question and students might not respond right away. So now I'm like panicking because I'm like, oh my God, are they paying attention? Do they, right? But then I realized, like, you know, maybe it's just really nervous and awkward to be the first to respond. So then I say, okay, you know what, let me model this, right? Let me respond first, right? Let me share something from my personal experience. And usually what that does is it opens up the space to a more kind of, you know, the space where they feel less and less pressure, right? To be that first person to respond. But it also is me trying to model, right, this vulnerability, right? To share of myself, because I can only ask them to share of themselves if I am willing to do it as well. And so, so yeah, this other piece is around, right, this authenticity, right? I cannot tell you how many students are so like astute and brilliant at calling it out, right? They know when you are not being real. They're like, nah, that is so fake, right? And so they may not say it to you, but they can, they know, right? And so it's really important that as much as possible, we are as honest and as authentic as possible in our interactions, in our communication with them, right? If we can't grade that paper, then we just need to be straight up. I can't grade that paper, I'm sorry, but I don't want to tell you anything that is not true, right? So just some things to think about. All right, this next piece is really one of my favorite pieces. I know it just looks like 2 lines, but it's really around, right, this notion of power that we've been talking about, right? And we mentioned it earlier around this about how the relationship between the teacher and student is kind of set up, right? It's set up in this hierarchy, right? The teacher's at the top and the student's at the bottom, right? And I draw this work from Paulo Freire's work. And one of the things he says that we're doing as educators is trying to balance this notion of authority and freedom in the classroom, right? How are we giving students, right, this freedom to be, but also still maintaining, right, this notion of authority that we have. And one of the ways that he suggests to do this is to shift, right, the relationship from this kind of vertical, hierarchical relationship to a more horizontal relationship, right? Where students are then gaining more power, right? And we are also beginning to engage our students as knowledge holders, right? They possess knowledge, we possess knowledge, we are teaching and learning together, right? We are beginning to be on the same, right, level playing field, right? And we honor them and their knowledge as such. And so for that, I offered these few things. One, to recognize the power that you hold, right? Every action and decision that you make in the classroom is important because it affects students in different ways, right? Some of the actions you will never even recognize have impacted them, but they will talk about for years to come. And some of it will be scarring to them, and some of it will be uplifting to them. And so you have to really consider, right, is this action going to support their growth and support their learning, or is it going to hinder it, right? And sometimes we're so unconscious and so unaware, which is why it requires like this hyper awareness of how we're engaging in everything we do, because you know, we don't know what students are reacting to and how they're responding. We don't know their histories of struggle and how they end up where we are today. So consider the impact of power and oppression on the conditions of students, right? If you recognize the historical legacy that continues to impact, especially our marginalized groups of students, then we understand that we have to engage in a different way. We understand that the needs are different. And then to affirm the voices of students of color, right? Because historically, right, a lot of voices have been silenced, especially for folks of color. It really requires an understanding of it in a deep way that allows it. And that's just not just for students of color, but for all students, right? To really affirm their voices and let them stand in their truths, and to let them know that you hear them, right? Like, wow, what you said was so profound. Like that, let me think about that, right? Let me think about how you're engaging with this work, right? This next piece is around dialogue, right? And I know we've all talked about it, right? We got to talk to our students. We just have to talk to them, because if we don't, right, then is there really a dialogue happening, right? It's more like a monologue. But it's really important to know who they are, right? To learn about them, to sacrifice your class time. Like sometimes I will just open up the space to be like, how you doing today? And some students are not used to that, right? Because historically and from a long time, education has rarely been about allowing students to take, right, ownership of the classroom space, right? It's been like, do this, do that, right? And so if we open up the space and we continue to open it up, because it may not work the first time because students have been accustomed to never talking, right? We have to continue to open up and sacrifice the space to allow for students to share of them. And even if it's after class, you know, sometimes I'll hang around after class with students and I'll be like, hey, how you doing? And they just want to talk, so I'll let them talk. And some questions to consider, right? If students are struggling in your class, have you asked them why? Have you thought about your relationship with them? And then do you care about them, right? Do you care if they succeed, right? Do you want them to succeed? All right, this next piece, I think we're wrapping up here, but it's really around this notion of ongoing educational formation. And that's for us, right? As educators, right? We have to do the work to teach ourselves about what different needs are there for students, right? And so I offered this because when I was in teaching one day, there was a student who identifies as they, them, theirs. And I didn't know that. And so I thought about, wow, how am I engaging in this work with students and not being cognizant of the fact that, right, the identity is really foundational to who students are. And so this was one way in which I thought, okay, now, you know, when you open up classes, you can ask students, right? What are your preferred pronouns? Some may not feel comfortable talking about it. Some don't want to be put on the spot, but, you know, a simple renaming of your name, such as what I've, you know, if you notice my name says she, her, hers, right? Allows a student to say, okay, right? This teacher gets it, right? That this is important. This is one way, right, that we can begin to educate ourselves, right? Because I had to go look up these pronouns and I had to go understand it. And then I had to work to shift my mindset, because, right, like they, them, theirs is very, right, for me, if I'm being really, really honest, it's really difficult for me to cognitively shift to that, to addressing the student in that manner. So I had to work through that. And so I really encourage us all in this space to really continue, right, our ongoing educational formation in this vein, right? If we really love students, we really care about them, we're really going to go to the limits to know who they are. All right, so this is the last quote, and then I'll open it up for any questions or comments. But this is my guy, Paulo Freire. He says, "It is impossible to teach without the courage to try 1,000 times before giving up. In short, it is impossible to teach without a forged, invented, and well thought out capacity to love." So thank you all. And I will drop a link in the chat to a few extra readings if anybody is interested. And I open it up for any comments or questions.
All right, if no one has anything to say, I'm going to jump in again, if you don't mind, Dr. Hernandez. I was reading the comments in the chat room, and some of the faculties, they're saying most of the students prefer chatting rather than talking. What I do is in my class all the time, I'm telling, I don't care if your camera off, I don't care if you chat, but it is for your benefit. Camera needs to be on so I can see your reaction, I can see your body language, I can communicate in life with you. But this is first. Secondly, chatting, what you're gonna do when you're gonna go to the real life to work with somewhere else, with your leader, with your peers, just chatting next to them and chatting with them? No, you will be learning talking to them. You have to learn how to communicate properly. You need to learn how to answer the question. You need to learn come up with the question and ask them also. So I am giving them, this is for your benefit to talk, and don't worry, you're gonna create right sentence, right answer, wrong answer. Just try to talk. Communication. This is how I'm helping them to, without shame, without hesitation, in feeling in the same level. There is no professor or students. They all are peers here in this room. So let's talk. This is how I do in my classes.
Thank you for sharing. I'm just looking at the chat. Dr. Brody, definitely they, them, theirs, very, right? It's difficult, but definitely respecting, right, folks and how they choose to identify. And Bell Hooks, man, she brings it. Yes, definitely love her work.